to the 225th episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. Thank you and welcome. Florida missed the Hurricane Dorian, passed us by for the most part. North Florida got some rain and winds and some storm surge. Good luck to all those people. Stay safe in North Carolina, South Carolina that are getting hit, and then it's going up towards Maine, so be safe and stay out of the wind and rain and all the other things that go along with that. It can prove havoc to training, but it didn't prove havoc down here for my training last weekend. We actually had some hot, dry weather, so that was good. Peak training is about over, so do another longish run and longish ride this weekend, and then start the taper and get ready for the Ironman Chattanooga the last week in September. So I'm happy about that, and happy to play outside all day long in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'm going to jump right into the main thing that I'm going to talk about today, and that was a study that was published in July of 2019 in the British Medical Journal, looking at people that eat meat versus people that eat fish versus the group of vegetarians and vegans, and looking at the risk of strokes and cardiovascular disease. And, you always see headlines posted. The first one, I think, was posted in, CNN. And it's kind of always funny to me that no matter what your political sector is, whether you're a Democrat or Republicans, one thing everybody always have in common is they don't want anything to do with vegans or vegetarians. You would think that people more concerned about the environment would lead towards being vegan or plant-based, and people that are more concerned about health would be. But when it comes to actually making choices for yourself and saying no to animal products, nobody wants to cross that line. There is just too much money involved and too many potential sponsors to step on those feet. So both big networks or private, they're all about, if there's a study out there that can, say doing, eating meat and eating processed food and all that kind of stuff is okay, or it won't hurt you, it's not that bad, then you better believe that's going to get out there. So the first place I've heard it, this study mentioned, was shared on CNN, but I'm sure it's around the other places. It's probably not even considered an issue for some of the other networks, just because it would be too absurd to eat, be a vegetarian or vegan. So the majority of the people taken for the study came out of the EPIC Oxford data bank of 65,000 men and women, originally followed or given questionnaires in 1993 to 2001. And they were asked, do you eat any meat and vegetarians, or do you eat any fish? And then the rest of the people, vegetarians were eggs, dairy, or no animal products at all, vegans, were combined into one group. And they came up with, after people answered the survey and so forth, 48,188 people that didn't have cardiovascular disease or had a stroke. And then they divided those into the meat eaters, fish eaters, and vegetarians. So there were 24,428 meat eaters, there were 7,506 fish eaters, and there were 16,254 vegans and vegetarians. And we don't know the breakdown of how many people were actually vegan. Now, for starters, anybody answering a dietary questionnaire or participating in this kind of study is going to be a little bit more educated, going to be a little bit more health conscious. So we're already skewing our population to people that in general are more health aware or healthy in general. So the people were given the dietary questionnaire in the beginning, and then the questionnaire was sent out again in 2010. And they came up with a total of 28,364 people that were followed for about 18 years. There were some people that didn't complete the follow-up questionnaire, didn't complete it completely. There was missing data as far as people treated with medication, statin or blood pressure medications. But anyway, so they came up with the end result that CNN grabbed on was that people that are vegan or vegetarian had a 13% decrease in ischemic heart disease than people that ate meat, 10 fewer cases per 1,000 over 10 years, but they had a 20% higher, vegetarians and vegans had a 20% higher rate of stroke, and particularly hemorrhagic stroke. So that was the take-home message of all this. But then you have to kind of delve down into it a little bit of what actually was going on. Now, we do know that on the follow-up period, there was a little bit of confusion as far as did people change their diet along the way. We do know that some people in the fish and vegetarian group crossed back into eating meat. Some of these people were actually eliminated, some weren't. If you look at the cholesterols in the three groups, they were fairly low. Vegetarians tend to have lower cholesterol than fish eaters and lower cholesterol than meat eaters, but nonetheless, nobody had really high cholesterol that you would expect in a meat-eating population. So the meat-eater cholesterol was like 212 with an HDL of 50 and a non-HDL of 161. The fish eaters, 204 with an HDL of 52 and non-HDL of 152, and the vegetarians, 192, HDL 49.8 and non-HDL of 142. If you look at the saturated fat, there was, even in the vegetarian-vegan diet, there was a pretty high percentage of saturated fat. There was 13.6% of their calories were from protein versus 17% from meat eaters. And of course, again, to say vegetarians, that's they ate dairy, they ate eggs and cheese and nut butters. Interestingly, they all weighed about the same. They were not obese, which again is not really a representative of the usual populations. We don't have any real indication of how many people were treated with medication. If you look at the total number of strokes, there were 678 strokes in the meat eaters, 136 strokes in the fish eaters, and 258 strokes in the vegetarian and vegan eaters. Now, this looks like it went up versus the fish eaters, but if you look at the percentage of people in their actual group, remember there's a lot more meat eaters that answered the questionnaires than fish eaters or vegetarians. So it was 0.15% of the people in the meat eating group had a stroke, and 0.1% of the fish eaters had a stroke, and 0.09% of the vegetarians that had a stroke. So it was actually a lower percentage of that number. And if you look at that actual difference, 0.09 versus 15%, there's actually a 60% difference in those groups, looking at actual numbers. But that's not what the study did. They didn't compare actual numbers. They wanted to risk stratify this over time to say whether or not vegetarians have a higher incidence of stroke. So to kind of summarize this, the predicted incidence or absolute risk difference presented as per 1,000 population over 10 years and were estimated by the use of hazard ratio or 95% confidence interval expressed as a floating absolute risk, which do not alter the value of the hazard ratio, but assign an approximate 95% confidence interval to all groups, including the reference group, thereby allowing an estimation of the uncertainty in the effect of size in the reference group. That wasn't written by a lawyer, that was written by a scientist, and that's pretty much is what the paper states. So again, they applied statistics to kind of get the answer out. One of the things that they attributed was that maybe people in the vegan and vegetarian group had a low cholesterol, much lower than in the meat-eating group, and that low cholesterol actually caused harm in the brain and caused more of a bleeding stroke risk because you need cholesterol in your brain, and we poor vegans don't have enough, and so that's what really caused the problem. The reality of it is, it wasn't extremely low cholesterol, and there's never been any other studies suggesting that very low cholesterol causes hemorrhages in the brain. And it's really funny if you look at all our studies suggesting that, the lower the LDL, the better, and the suggestion and recommendations to start adding PCSK8 inhibitors to lower the LDL as markedly as low down into the 30s. We're not seeing an increase in hemorrhagic stroke of these people. These drugs have been out for a few years now, and they've not been pulled from the market because people are having hemorrhagic strokes because their LDL cholesterol is low. So that's really just silly. Their statistics were altered because of the difference in group size. But if you go back and look, there's still not a lot of events even in the meat eating group. So you have a relatively healthy population regardless of what they ate. So and they weren't overweight or obese either. So we have people that ate somewhat of a calorie-restricted diet enough that they're maintaining their adequate body weights. So the whole numbers to start with are decreased. What people eat was a self-reported questionnaire, so there was no blood test to kind of look at or correspond to what people were actually eating. So it was an accounting of what people thought that they ate. And we've seen enough dietary questionnaires come back that recollection is off, and especially if you're participating in a study where you want to look good. Everybody wants to win the war of who eats best. So everybody's going to report their overall best. The best day that they eat, whether they eat meat or chicken. It's going to be the best. It's going to be more chicken, more lean meat. Not as often, not as high a proportion. They're going to forget some of the bad things. And of course, we don't know about junk food. We don't know, and we can only surmise that because the saturated fat intake in the vegetarian and vegan group was elevated, that they weren't eating the best of the best vegan diets. So it's, across the board, junk food vegans and vegetarians are mixed into that group, even though they're probably eating a little bit better. But from, history serves itself well. If you talk to vegetarians, most of them eat a fair amount of cheese and dairy to make up for their lack of eating meat. So they don't want to eat animal products, but they eat cheese and eggs, and they may eat those every day. So that's a source of cholesterol, which is kind of funny because, again, lower cholesterol was blamed on the problem. But the reality of it is we don't know what these people were eating exactly, as it's self-reported. Both groups, again, the vegan and vegetarian group had a higher fat and higher protein diet, so that certainly could be improved on. So we see, this study that's come out that says that, you might have less heart attacks, but you may have more stroke as a vegan or a vegetarian, and it may actually be more bleeding strokes. And then what do you actually do with this information? Well, I think it as an observational study, and there's so many details that we're missing, it's hard to draw anything from this. Statistics were used to prove a point, and not look, I think when you look at a study, you really need to look at absolutes over time. And how could this again possibly be when, we look at populations over time, whether it's a Seventh-day Adventist study or any other blue zones, and certainly cardiovascular disease risk, lifestyle disease risk, all follow the same risk factor profile. Elevated blood pressure, elevated cholesterol leads to more events, both strokes and heart attacks, cancers, multiple sclerosis. So it's not like a stroke is you're more at risk of a stroke if you have a certain dietary pattern. And I think that, people, even if you start to feel better about, maybe my stroke risk is not as bad as if I'm a meat eater, I think it's more likely to make people that are vegan or vegetarian worry a little bit about, well, I'm doing all this and this is as good as it gets. There's still people having strokes and heart disease and maybe even more. So why should I even bother? And I think that's probably the worst thing that could come out of this. And I think that really needs to be debunked right away. I think that lends itself to, well, just eat what you want. Nobody knows what's going to happen. We don't have any control. We're all just victims, whether we have a stroke or we have heart attack. It's, maybe genetics, and we don't, there's nothing we can do about it. And I think that can be further from the truth. I think the good things to come out of the study was that, people that lead a relatively healthy life, there are decreased events. So we should take that away. So there is a spectrum from, being a junk food, hamburger, cheese-eating person to a, 80%, less than 10% protein, whole food vegan person. There's a spectrum of eating, and that the better you do along the spectrum, the better off you will be. There was another study published in September of this year in Jami that looked at 438,952 people in the UK as well, followed from 2006 to 2010. And then followed up again in 2018, and these people had genetically low LDL cholesterols, and they looked at the people that had low LDLs and low systolic blood pressures versus the normal population. And the mean age of these people were 65 years of age. There were 24,980 major coronary events in this study. The people that had genetically low LDL, which was just 14 milligrams per deciliter lower, had a lower incidence of cardiovascular disease as far as major coronary events or stroke. If you had a low blood pressure as well as low cholesterol, it was even additive. So again, it takes us back to where we are, puts us back at baseline, that a low LDL is protective. That's a bad cholesterol, and a lower blood pressure is protective. These people had a BMI of around 27, so it wasn't 25, 27. It wasn't as thin as we would like people to be. Their blood pressure and cholesterol still weren't markedly low, and they had improvements. So again, it puts us back to the reality that the better your diet is, the more improvement that you can actually achieve. I think you have to remember that what you do eat matters. It all adds up. It may add up at different times for different people. If you have a little bit if your genetic risk is a little bit greater, then you don't have as much leeway, perhaps, as somebody that has great genes, but then eats very bad. But just like money, you can out-eat your protective genes, and you can outspend what you have. It's the same thing. So nobody is free from getting high cholesterol, diabetes, overweight, and lifestyle diseases. It's just a matter of the percentages and when it kicks in. We've had two great examples here in the office over the last week. One of the members started out with a cholesterol of 330 in a young age. So obviously you would say, well, this person has poor genes when it comes to cholesterol metabolism, and to get to 330, that's a really bad thing. And he might not be so effective and be able to lower that on his own. In the traditional medical setting, he would have been placed on 2 or 3 different cholesterol-lowering therapies, maybe given the injectable PCSK8 for about $13,000, $14,000 a year. But he opted for a whole food plant-based diet. He's lost about 50 pounds, and in that 50 pounds, his cholesterol went down to 187. So that's actually a very impressive reduction in cholesterol in a very short period of time. And so when people say that they can't, I think it comes down to, again, recollection of what you're actually eating, and paying strict attention to what you're doing. If you go out, then you're putting yourself, you no longer know what you're eating. You can ask for all you want, and you may go to a place where you think you're getting something, but it becomes very, very hard to manage what you're actually eating when you're eating out and you're trying to lower your cholesterol. Another person had a familial hypertriglyceridemia, meaning that his triglycerides, his father had high triglycerides, his uncle, and he did, and at an early age, in his 30s, was found to have triglycerides of 1,100. Again, in traditional medical care, that would be take 3 or 4 different medications, and you're probably going to die early, because if you look at the blood, the fat separates out, and there's actually a milky layer, and it's pretty ugly. On his own, dietarily, he lowered his triglycerides to 120. At one point, he did a cleanse just as an experiment on himself with lemon juice and maple syrup. Not really recommended, but nevertheless, it was a good test. And he went from 700-800 down to, in the low 100s. So even people that have markedly elevated cholesterols and triglycerides, the first thing is when you don't eat, these numbers are going to get better. So not taking in food, these numbers all go back to baseline. So then it comes, now what can I eat to keep these numbers in line? Both of these people lost, again, about 50 pounds. So they were clearing out their storage units, so to speak. So where all this fat and cholesterol had been stored, they were eliminating that, and their liver still worked, and so they were able to metabolize it and get rid of it. So again, wherever you are in the health scheme, whether you're 300 pounds and a cholesterol of 300, or 180 pounds and a cholesterol of 300, you can still eliminate these cholesterol and triglyceride stores from your body and regain your metabolism. It just takes some work and dedication. And these two people really were dedicated and worked and were very conscious of what they were actually putting in their mouth. It became their motive, what they're going to do. Both of them had health scares, but not significant health damage. But they again became very focused, and that they want to win the game, and they're going to achieve their goal of getting their numbers under control and getting their health under control. So it wasn't something they did in the background while they were having a good time. They didn't do it when it was convenient. They didn't do it when they weren't traveling. It's like, I'm going on vacation, or I have family over, or we're having friends down. It wasn't an on again, off again type of situation. It was their primary focus of what they're actually going to do. And it's not like anything else. If I'm going to train for a marathon, I have to train all the time. It's not, I'm going to go on vacation and I'm not going to do anything, or I'm going to take weeks off that I don't do anything. It's not convenient today. It's raining. It's too hot. You have to keep training, and that has to be the primary focus. If I tried to go into an Ironman or a marathon untrained, it would be very painful, and I might not finish. And then I would be very disappointed, because it's like I didn't finish, and I should have, would have, could have. And even, I will tell you, even in anybody that's done races, the thought always comes through your head during a race, I wish I could have done or would have done more. And sometimes that's, a reality that you could have done more, but sometimes, you did all you can for the time you have. But nevertheless, you'd like to show up having done your best as far as training. And these guys did the same thing with regards to their health. Every day was a focus on, what do I need to eat to achieve my goals of getting this under control? Because both were actually backed into the corner and needed to do something, because they were going to have a major decline in their health if they didn't change. Both of these people became whole food and plant-based. Both gave up oils. Neither one were eating fish or meat or eggs or cheese. Both actually were very strict as far as eating whole foods, and really paying attention to it. It wasn't, and part of their success is probably because they were afraid. Again, their backs were against the wall. They were having significant health scares that, and looking their mortality in the eye, and that if we don't change something, something bad is going to happen rather quickly. And I think that's where the difference is in a lot of people. If they're not there, they don't necessarily see the health scare as being imminent. It's not happened yet. It could happen, but hopefully it won't. And I think that hopefully it won't is probably the worst thing, that hoping that something won't happen but continuing to do what you're doing is not a good plan. And it's like hoping that the hurricane won't come even though it's headed right towards you, and you're going to stay out on the beach, and then when something happens, then you're scrambling to try to get it when you had plenty of time to get out of harm's way, with all the warnings. And so I think that people need to think about their health as the warning signs, and the warning signs are, again, high cholesterol and hypertension and being overweight and being sedentary. These are dramatic. These are big warning signs that say something bad is going to happen. It's just a matter of time, and I need to try to change and get out of harm's way. And the question comes in, how long do you have to make that change? Life happens pretty quick, and it passes by, very quickly. And I like, there's a guy named Jesse Itzler out there, and he talks about when you're 50 years old, you only have so many weekends left, so many times to visit. If you visit your parents twice a year, and you may live, the average age for a man 78 or 80, it could be only 20 times. And so how many times are you going to put this off? How many times, how many days do your kids go off to college? How many days do you have before some major thing happens to your health? And then now you're really, your back's against the wall. Now you've had the bypass, or you've had the heart attack, or you've had the vision change. When do you actually start to do something about it? And that becomes a $24 million question for us as healthcare providers, is how do we get people to start doing the change before there's been major damage occur? And, I think we play both sides of the fence as far as, if you got to lose 100 pounds and you're losing a pound a week, then that's going to be 100 weeks. So 2 years that you're trying to get this weight off. And if you're trying to get this weight off for 2 years, the disease is still there as long as the weight is. And the risk factors are still there, and they're reversing very slowly. So, you're assuming that you have 2 years without a major health scare to turn back the clock. But the disease and all these metabolically active proteins and hormones are circulating around. So you're kind of swimming with sharks, hoping not to get bit until you get out of the area where the sharks are. It's not like once you start your plant-based journey that you're disease-free or your risk goes down to zero. It's still there as long as you're carrying all the other risk factors. So the longer it takes you to get these risk factors under control, you're still in a risky environment. So I think to just, again, a little bit of effort gets you a little bit of results. I get a lot of motivation from other podcasts and people that do endurance events. And there's a guy that I hope to have on the podcast that's a former Navy SEAL, Chad Wright, who went up to do a training run with Jesse Itzler, who's also was training for an ultra event. And they do these runs that are called Last Man Standing. And basically, the last man standing is people, there's like a 4 to 5 mile loop, and you run, and you have an hour to complete it. And you can, if you get done in 40 minutes or 45 minutes, then you have until the clock strikes 12 again to start again. And every time you toe the line and you start and you run again until, somebody says uncle or drops out and the last guy standing, wins the race. And, it becomes, and so these guys were training for this. And this guy named Chad Wright goes up to train with them, and he sets the rules for this training run. So both Jesse and there was another guy, a football player, that hadn't run and covered any significant distance for quite some time, and they didn't know what was going to happen. And so he sets the distance that they're going to cover. So right then and there, that's a huge challenge. If anybody's actually met somebody else for a run and they have not, most of the time people say, how far are we going to go run? What are we in for? And you can translate this into, well, how much weight do I have to lose, or how much do I have to drop my cholesterol? So there's some goal there, but to not know, even if you've ever gone to any kind of a workout, whether it's CrossFit or a swim class, and you don't know exactly what the workout's going to be, there's a certain fear that perhaps you won't be able to complete the task. And sometimes, maybe a lot of times with certain people, it's that fear that actually paralyzes them, because right up front they think they can't. I'll never be able to lose the weight. I'll never be able to achieve a BMI of that low. That's a body mass index. I'll never be able to get my cholesterol down that low. It's always been that high. I'm afraid that I will fail, so I don't want to really try. Or, from the get-go, as they're starting, they're just kind of waiting to fail. When's the shoe going to drop? Because you have this little negative voice inside, I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I can. This seems too hard. All these thoughts start to creep in. And, when the endurance and these people doing these 100-mile races, they talk about sometimes little things start to happen that you use as an excuse to quit. Things that come up that, okay, I've got this big bad blister and it's really hurting. I twisted my ankle. I'm having a lot of leg cramps. I'm having cramping in my stomach. I've thrown up. I can't hold anything down, and it's a reason to quit. And you might be thinking those are really good reasons to quit. But in an endurance event, especially some of these 100-miler type of things, people get sick and then they come around. I've heard people talk about that they didn't feel good for the first 50 or 60 miles, and then they felt better. In my little limited world, a lot of mornings I don't feel good until 3 or 4 miles into things, and then I feel great. But if you quit, when you start out the driveway and you don't feel well, then you're going to turn back. Or if you let those negative voices keep coming in, you end up, you end up stopping. And, it comes down to things like, what really matters? Does it, a blister never really killed anybody. It can be fixed. Even, it's going to get better afterwards. So that's really nothing to stop at. Does the nausea, how much credence do I give this? What can I do? How can I troubleshoot this to turn it around? And the same thing goes with, weight and cholesterol. You just have to be positive. And so for this run, one of the rules, besides that Chad was going to ultimately decide how far they ran, so they just had to keep running as long as Chad ran. They couldn't use any swear words because that was a negative, and they couldn't say anything negative. So it had to be all positive for this run that may last, who knows how many hours. And they had to take turns saying what they were grateful for. And so it turns out they ran 50 miles, further than the football player had ever run, even though he had cramps, further than Jesse had run for a long time. They weren't completely broken or, injured when they stopped, but they had pushed beyond what they were comfortable in doing, and certainly had reached significant discomfort. But they all made it through, and they came out better before it, and they learned the lesson that, this positivity sometimes you have to, it's not, I hate to say fake it till you make it, but you keep having to say the things that are positive to keep you going as opposed to defeating yourself. There's so many people out there that blame other people for their nutritional defeats, whether it's their spouse or their husband or their friends or their kids, but it's really the negative voices in their own head that lets them quit. There's most people listening to this podcast are not going to smoke if they have somebody that they run into that smokes, and they'll say, hey, why don't you have a cigarette, or why don't you do some, most people know that smoking is a really bad thing, and they're not going to take it up. People know that it's very addictive, and if you start, you might not be able to stop, and it's just something that's not good for your health, so I'm not going to do it. Yet, if people are vegan and they get around their friends that aren't vegan, they'll say, oh, what the heck for the weekend? Or they'll lose, they get off their dietary, regimen for the weekend and say, oh, what the heck, I deserve it. And so your voice starts giving you all these different reasons why you shouldn't follow your plan and stick to your plan. And so, so I think that, again, becoming and saying and staying positive for what really is your plan and sticking to it is really the way around it. Hearing one study touted by, hosts on CNN or Fox News that eating vegan is going to cause more strokes is not a reason to go off your nutritional plan and say, what the heck, I can't control anything anywhere. That just adds, fire to in self-defeating. When, your friends are saying, why don't you go ahead and have a piece of birthday cake from Publix, a little piece won't hurt. What happens here stays here, you're on vacation, you deserve it. Those are the outside voices, but the inside voices then take that and say, well, yeah, they're probably right. It doesn't really matter anyway. Well, it does really matter. And, you have to keep your positive voices, why you're doing your why, and keep stating them to keep, true to what your overall game plan is. So these guys that drop their triglycerides and cholesterol, they weren't tripped up by it's not convenient, or I'm traveling, or other people say, or other people do. It was their plan and their mission to lower their triglycerides and lower their cholesterol, so they're staying the course. Is it easy? Are they perfect? No. They both tripped up a little bit along the way, but they didn't allow a little stumble to change their course. We see a lot of people that go 1 or 2 days and it's tough, and then they revert and they're back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And those people really aren't committed. They want to, but they haven't really perhaps stated their goals or defined their goals and set this as, yes, I'm going to win this battle. So they don't see it as a win or lose. They see it as a, something we'll just dabble in a little bit and see how it goes. But again, little effort gets little results. The people that I see that make the biggest strides in nutrition class are the people that are on a mission. A lot of them, their back's against the wall, but they decide that they're going to do this, and they take the notes and they take the information that they learn in class, and they devise a menu, they devise an exercise routine, and they follow it and they stick to it. And, again, I'd like to congratulate, just getting off the base here, Donna Berry for winning the challenge for the number of exercise minutes. She did fabulous over the course of the month for the August birthday month challenge. Not only was she motivating to the rest of the people in the challenge, but she was motivating to her family and kept everybody else moving and striving to keep up with her. And, and that's what it's all about. It's a matter of doing things when you don't necessarily want to do them, or even just to get started. They call the programs Couch to 5K for a reason. People are on the couch and you have to get off the couch. And sometimes you have to get off the couch, get your shoes on, and get out the door. And when you can get down the street a little bit, you start to feel better. When you jump in the water, you start to feel better. There's a lot of times when I go to swim that I don't really necessarily want to go swim, but once I'm in the water, I love it. And so you have to get yourself past the point of no return. Once you're eating that beautiful, colorful plate, you like it and you enjoy it and you feel great afterwards. But in the beginning, when you're looking at the menu and there's a steak or there's a hamburger on there, the idea that you think you want, that old comfort food starts to jump in. But you have to have a plan, and you have to work your plan, no matter what it is. And so those people in class, they have a goal, and they're focused on obtaining the goal. When you want to have a big goal, like lose 100 pounds, that can become ominous. I'm sure it was ominous for the member that had triglycerides of 1,100, that he wanted to get those down, and really wasn't given any encouragement that he could do it. And he did it largely on his own. It was, you pick at a little bit at a time, a little bit of a time. Let's see what this does, and then you make adjustments. If people are trying to lose weight, then if it's not coming off in a week, then you need to make an adjustment if you haven't seen the scale move in a week. If you have a lot of weight to lose, it's probably not safe that you take 6 years to take it off, so you should be focusing on making more adjustments. And actually it's easier when you're heavier because your caloric expenditure is much greater. So if you have more to lose, it should be coming off faster at first. If it's not, then you need to readjust. If your cholesterol is not coming down to where it needs to be, then you have to readjust. It might be harder for you than somebody else because maybe you can't even eat any peanuts or nuts and somebody else can get by with it, but then you have to readjust. That's your mission, and that's what you're going to do. If you're starting on the couch and you want to run a really fast 5K, you can't run it immediately. You can't go out for a sprint. You've got to work yourself up. But not pushing and just walking for the first 2 years is not going to get you where you want to do it either. So it's make a plan and then keep reassessing as you go and changing that plan along the way. And don't let anybody else talk you out of your dreams. Again, I hope I have Chad right on the podcast, but he wanted to be a Navy SEAL from the time he graduated from high school, and he ended up having a pericardial cyst, and the Navy doctor basically said, you can't be a SEAL, you can't undergo SEAL training with this. And when he went to see other doctors, the other doctor's like, well, why would we do this? It's not causing you any symptoms from this, so why would we operate on a perfectly asymptomatic young man when we could make things a lot worse? And he's like, well, no, his dreams were to become a Navy SEAL, and with a cyst, he couldn't become a Navy SEAL, so he had the surgery. And when he had the surgery, he realized that a lot was given to him, that he could have, he got rid of this cyst, and now he needed to focus full on to achieve his dream. So very, very focused, very much with a plan. And all these guys are just so driven. It's what's the problem, and let's make a solution, and let's readjust and go on. So don't let one study in CNN or that's broadcast on CNN or something that you pull up on the internet dissuade you or cause you fear, because the fear or being dissuaded is not reality, and it just takes your mind off of the present. It just causes noise in your head. Keep your plan focused and your eye on the, what's in front of you, and you'll be able to achieve your goals. So this study that's come out has not swayed me or worried me one bit. I still think that, you eat a whole food plant-based diet, no added oil, and you maintain a lean weight and you keep very active, and your risk of a stroke or your risk of cancer goes markedly down. And that scare tactics and fear-mongering and worry doesn't have anything to do with it. And if anything's going to make things worse, that you need to strive to have, a positive attitude. And I've learned from these people that, when I'm going out, I'm going to do everything I can to keep negative thoughts from derailing my plan as I go along for my race. And you just have to keep telling yourself. And sometimes the self-talk's the better. Sometimes nobody else is going to encourage you, and it has to come from within. And I think that that's the most powerful voice, is the one that comes from within, that you can do it. It's great if you can find somebody else that's going to support you, but the reality of it is you need to have the voice, because no matter what anybody else said, it's the voice inside you that's ultimately going to lead you to either succeed or fail at your goals. So don't blame anybody else. Don't be a victim, and get out and move and adjust your plan, adjust your nutrition as you need to. With that in mind, if you need a really good cookbook, hop on over to our website at drdulaney.com, DoctorDulaney.com, and click on the link to order our Dulaney plant-based wellness cookbook, The Doctor, the Dietitian, and the Diva. 3 generations of cooking. You'll like the recipes. They're all on the plan. They'll all get you where you're going. March 28th is going to be the date of our nutrition conference down here in Port Charlotte, Florida, at the Beach Complex. The tickets are now available on Eventbrite. In addition, we're going to be putting up very shortly a week immersion program associated with that event. So a limited number of people that want to come in for a whole week, starting Monday through Friday, and then the conference will be on Saturday. We are going to have an intensive, very limited number focused group of people where we feed you. We do group exercise, group yoga, Pilates, according to what you've liked, consultations with myself, Addie Dulaney Minor, the registered dietitian, blood work evaluation, whether you've had some before, you have it here, looking at metrics to really get people focused on changing. And if you're still quivering and you want to check in with us, you'll stay at a hotel. You'll eat the food that we provide, which will be colorful and wonderful and delicious and nutritious. And you'll get a lot of information. You'll basically get the courses, that information that I do here in the office in nutrition, to educate you intensely. We'll go shopping together, again, activities together. You won't be left on your own. It won't be a bunch of free time spent in the hotel. We will meet people where they are. So if we have people that want to run, we will be running with you. If you haven't run and you're starting to walk, we will have people walking with you. Yoga, Pilates, the whole 9 yards. We have good kayaking in the area. So a week of activity, a week of learning, a week of wellness. So if you have some interest right now, think about it, because again, there are going to be a limited number of spots. So you can email me for more information about these things, but we'll be putting them up on Eventbrite soon as well. So have a great weekend. Get out and train. Stay safe if Dorian is headed your way, and work your plan.